Let me go to my next guest. We are joined with the man himself, KJ No. KJ No is a political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of, I can't say it, specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia Pacific region, contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is now available at iacenter.org. You can also find KJ on Breakthrough News Network at the China Report. Break the News is a fantastic network, and KJ, of course, is awesome. How you doing, my man? You doing okay this morning?
Thank you. Good to be with you.
For some reason, I apparently am losing the ability to speak, but we're going to power through this. We're going to work through this. KJ, there is fascinating news that I have to get your take on. So there is a report. In fact, there were a few reports that's out. Some of them are slightly conflicting, but I believe that you can elucidate which one is more accurate. I'm closing some of these just to get to it. So apparently, from my understanding, a Chinese warship off the coast of Yemen blinded with a laser, of all things, that made it lasers operational energy weapons, a spy plane from Germany that was in some kind of operation on the coast of Yemen. And it damaged it, or at the very least, injured the plane to such a degree that they had to leave. They abandoned the mission. So it was called Operation Aspides, or Aspides, 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 I'll go with that. The aircraft was conducting a reconnaissance around Yemen because, after all, the Yemen Ansarullah has been taking down ships and has basically had an embargo on on air and on water for anything going into Israel, because Israel is committing a genocide. They've taken it upon themselves to say, we don't want to support the genocide, and we don't want anybody else to support a country that is supporting genocide. So any ship that is going into this region is going to be sunk. And they have even put out video of them sinking ships, which is fascinating. My point is that China, for the first time, has made a laser operational in this kind of setting. And there's so many questions that are raised with China doing this. China hasn't necessarily confirmed or denied that they've done this. Germany has, I guess, brought in the Chinese ambassador, apparently pissed off at the Chinese ambassador and demanding some kind of answer for China doing this. After all, this was in Yemen. This wasn't in Germany waters. This is Germany sticking its nose into something that it has no business doing, supporting a genocide. And China, working on God's side, injured this aircraft. What is the reality of this? What is going on with this? And let's start there, because I want to step into this. I'm trying to understand what China is doing here. Usually China doesn't get involved in stuff like this. I know they've had boats in the region, and I know they've been doing radar assessments and getting intelligence assessments, especially in the context of Iran. What are they doing? They just attacked a German plane.
I think that we don't know the full facts yet. I will point out that the Chinese foreign ministry has said that the German narrative is totally inconsistent with the facts known by the Chinese side. In other words, they're saying you're lying.
Just to be clear, KJ, I have zero issue with China doing this. In fact, I applaud them doing this. So if the facts are the way that Germany puts it, bravo. That's where I'm at, right? So I don't take issue with it, but please.
So let me tell you what I think happened. So there's this project called Aspides, probably more like Project Asperger's, but they went in there and they just didn't know what they were up to. They're using a civilian, it's a civilian plane that they're flying into a war zone. Apparently, it's some kind of, it's operated by a civilian operator, but it had German military crew on it.
Right.
And the language in the Western press is that China fired a laser and blinded them, and they had to rush back in case they were going to explode, into, flaming, barbecue pits or something like that. My guess is that that Chinese ship has been in there for at least a month, probably longer. Okay. Now, if there's a warship, and if you are sending an AWACS type surveillance aircraft, you need to communicate very, very clearly
I
with the
see.
ground, ship. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself into a world of trouble, because the Chinese surveillance ship is surveilling the entire electronic spectrum and airspace and everything. And I don't think that it was probably a laser that was fired. Again, we don't know the full facts. Was probably a targeting laser that hit the plane,
Oh, like a warning.
like a warning. And once you get that, like little laser dot on you, that's when you know it's time to get out of the area, because
Good point.
otherwise, yeah. So I think probably there was some kind of warning that was sent. But the question is, why is Germany in there? What is Germany doing in the Red Sea? What is this project Aspides? And why are they coming? This is important. Why are they coming within visual distance of a Chinese warship? Okay, that is an incredibly, I think, dangerous thing to do. And
Right.
so I think there was probably some kind of warning shot. There was a warning message that was sent by the Chinese, and then the Germans turned tail very rapidly, and then they had to get tranquilizers and intense psychotherapy to deal with it. So
Well, they're Germans. I don't know what that means. I'm being horrible. As I point out, even if the Western narrative is exactly what it is, for me, it's bravo. Um, Look, Germany is supporting a genocide. Germany is supporting the shipping lanes that are supposed that operation was taking place, at least by their own narrative, in order to have some level of reconnaissance on issues or things that are taking place around the Red Sea. Correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, Ansar Allah was using Chinese company for the targeting that they were doing on various ships. Correct me if I'm wrong.
yes, and again, I think it's a reasonable supposition, but we don't have facts around it. So I think it's very, very possible. But
KJ, I don't say this as an indictment. I
no,
say it
I
as simply
understand.
that they're doing God's work.
No, I understand absolutely, and I'm just telling you the limits of my understanding. So
Fair enough. Fair
yeah.
enough. Okay. I guess what I'm saying is the Chinese have started, as you say, they move very slowly, but they are moving.
Hmm.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, would that private company work with Ansar Allah if the China disagreed with what Ansar Allah was doing?
Yes, certainly the Chinese oppose the genocide. They
Yes.
think that this is a blight on the international system. It's a blight on humanity. They oppose it strongly. Are they doing things that are specifically military to assist the forces of resistance? That's an unknown piece here. That's an unknown piece here. But we know that the West is facilitating it. It's
Yes.
prosecuting anybody who speaks out against it. It's literally the message in the West is we're doing a genocide, and anyone who opposes this genocide is breaking the law. I mean, this is literally the singular message that the West is that the West, the Europe, the EU is sending out. It is extraordinary, and I think that inside this context, any counter message that is sent by China or by any other global South country is salutary. I think it's important that the EU and NATO understand that they cannot conduct themselves with impunity around the world. So this is, I think, a small shot over the bow, but as you say, I think it's a salutary message.
Yeah, I was fascinated by the story because I don't think I've seen a Chinese warship involved in anything, let alone freaking out a German plane where these guys run back and start, like you said, tranquilizers because apparently they thought they were going to get shot down. And you're probably right. A laser could also just be a targeting device. It may not necessarily be just a high-powered laser in the way that they talk about it, because they're making it sound like China released this new weapon that attacked an aircraft that blinded the people where they were terrified that they were going to fall off the sky.
Yeah,
I think your point sounds more right. That okay, you're buzzing around the Chinese warship, and the Chinese warship is giving you a heads up of back off, and they back off, and then create this hysterical story about it because oh my God, we're Europeans and we can't believe that somebody told us no.
right.
That sounds more right.
And I
I,
think it's all part of a larger mindset and strategy of creating small incidents, provocations, and then running with them, expanding them, turning them into like huge propaganda, campaigns. Essentially, China is threatening us. China is threatening us all around the world. China is a threat. Well, as I've said before, the only threat that China poses is the threat of a good example, that you can have good governance and that you can lift up your people and without immiserating them and, you know, waging war and destroying societies. I mean, that's the real threat. When the US says China is a threat or EU says China is a threat, what they really mean is China is uppity. It won't stay in its place in its place on the on the plantation, which is what it was supposed to be. Remember, this Western engagement with China was to make sure that it joined the capitalist plantation and that it
right.
remained a tenant farmer on it. China didn't follow the bargain and it developed itself into a rich and powerful country. Well, that's unacceptable from the standpoint of the plantation owner. And therefore, the threat that China poses is the threat of being uppity, of not subjugating itself to the plantation master.
Just as a hypothetical, I've heard some people make this or put this question, so I'll put this question to you. They would say, why hasn't China gotten more aggressive in pointing out, A, this is a genocide, and to be more, I'll use the term provocative, in pushing back against the genocide as it takes place?
Yeah. Again, I don't have a special insight into the workings or the strategies of the Chinese government, but I can make some, reasonable assumptions. First is that China is helping countries in the way that it's building relations, supporting them economically. For example, the main lifeline for Iran is China. China is buying most of its oil, for example. So
Mhm.
that in and of itself is very, very critical. You don't necessarily have to think, why are they not, brawling with each other? Sometimes intervening directly in a brawl is not the best way to, solve the issue. Like if two people get into a fight and you just jump in, that usually doesn't make things better, right? There are multiple different ways to intervene in that type of situation, but getting right into the thick of it is not going to be helpful. I think there are multiple different ways that you can de-escalate a situation without necessarily getting into the you know get going down to the mat with it. But I do think that it is a profound and deep insult to humanity and also uh, to international law. And I think the Chinese are very, very concerned about it. They've
Yeah.
always come out in support of the Palestinians. They're one of the first people to recognize the Palestinian state. Some European nations have come around to it decades later, but the Chinese have always recognized the Palestinian state. They had an embassy in occupied Palestine. The Palestinians, the PLO, actually had an embassy in Beijing. And yes, and in an earlier period, yes, there was armed support of the PLO. The Chinese actually did support the PLO directly with arms and training, etc. That has transitioned. I think that the Chinese are less about exporting revolution, and they're more about building out a structure of the global South that can resist the complete and total domination of the imperial West. And that is a long and slow process, and I know it's frustrating, but time will tell. As I said, it's a different game the Chinese are playing. They're playing Go, which is to say you build connections. And once you build connections and you have that mass of stones on the board, they cannot be picked off individually. That's the strategy of Go. And of course, in the West, we're used to thinking in chess terms. What's the next best tactical move? How do you, keep your, opponent on the defensive? How do you stay, in your best, tactical position? These are different ways of looking at the global situation. And, time will tell. I mean, the thing that I think is really, really horrifying people all over the world is this constant, atrocious, endless stream of genocidal atrocities. I mean, that is it's so profoundly evil, and I think everybody wants somebody to do something. And China is a big power. Why doesn't China do something? Well, China is doing something, and it's doing what it sees as the best in the situation. But I think the question we really need to ask is, what are we doing? It is our governments, it's the governments in the West that are facilitating this genocide. These are Western contractors, Western, arms manufacturers, Western software companies, right? Microsoft and Palantir and all of these are all involved. So I think the better question to ask is, what are we doing to prevent, these actors from perpetrating this genocide? How can we take action? How can we speak up rather than saying, "Oh, somebody else should do something. I'm so upset." I think.
No, I agree with you. No, I agree with you. I asked the question because the question gets asked. And by the way, the same question gets asked of Russia also. But I think at its core of that question is effectively we've lost control of our government. And that government is gone rogue and is effectively committing a genocide. And we are effectively
don't think that
begging
we've
other
lost
people.
control over our government. I think it's always behaved that way. It's just become really obvious. It's just become,
That's right.
they haven't bothered with the mystification. They're just going ahead. We're going to do it, and you have to deal with it. The strong do what they will. The weak suffer what they must. And they're making just that very, very clear and obvious. But, I think if we had, a government that was responsive to the needs of the people, we wouldn't be in any wars, period. We would not be supporting genocide anywhere. But the fact is that we don't have much leverage over our government. We do have a little bit, and that little amount, the little amount, whether it's shaming them, challenging them, whatever it is, that has to be, lifted up as much as possible. And the other thing which is really important, and it touches on what your previous speaker said, is that we're so conditioned to think of ourselves as individuals, and once you think of yourself that way, you are helpless. You cannot take action. It's not simply that your life is meaningless, but it's in some very foundational sense, you are helpless politically, certainly. you are helpless. If you only think of yourself as an individual. This is why Margaret Thatcher, as she was reforming, doing literally a restructuring of the British social welfare state, she had this mantra. She said, "There is no such thing as society. There are only individuals." She said this over and over again. And she also said, "There is no alternative," Tina, right? But this ideology of individualism is a way of disempowering people, because it makes the possibility of solidarity, which is necessary in order to resist, impossible. Shelley said, "They are few, we are many," right?
Yeah.
Uh, and so if you have this understanding that you can build power in solidarity, then you have a way of challenging the war machine. Then you have a way of challenging the genocidal imperial project. But if you think of yourself only as an individual, you do not have a chance. And I've said this before, but the ideology of individualism is the ideology of the predator. The predator needs the prey to individuate so that they can be picked off and killed and eaten. And so when we are given this ideology, this indoctrination that we are only individuals, you make it and you fail by yourself, you're born alone, you die alone. Of course, that's ridiculous. Nobody is born by themselves, right? They're either born inside anti-social structure and given birth to by other, by mothers. So this ideology of individualism is the kind of 0 degree of indoctrination that has to be challenged. Once you start breaking that, then you start to see that you have, a vast panoply of other humans, that you can connect with and start to speak up and take action. And that's what needs to happen. Not individual acts of heroism, not individual acts of resignation, but humans, people getting together in solidarity, understanding that they are few, we are many, and that we have to speak up and take action together. That's the thing that will make a difference.
You're absolutely right. And you're right that this was something that's been going on for a very long time. They've dispatched with the mystification, as you call it. I mean, if you think back to Ronald Reagan during the Iran-Contra affair, it was a big deal when Ronald Reagan was paying kill squads in South America. And Reagan comes on TV, "I'm the Gipper. Buck stops with me. I didn't know anything about it." There you go. And there was a big to-do about the Iran-Contra affair. You had Ali North, meaning the fact that Reagan did that blew the mind of the population, because we're supposed to be loving light, and the idea of us paying kill squads and getting money from Iran to do it is off the table. When Obama went into Syria, okay, well, that became known. Nobody cared. When Trump said, "I'm stealing the oil," that was known. Nobody cared. Meaning these wars have gotten to the point where they've become just kind of an objective truth that we accept, as opposed to this thing that's hidden. It's weird. It's a rot. Like, Dr. Wilmer Leon was talking about in our society, that this stuff has become objective, that we've just kind of accepted. And I guess the highest value of that, or the highest example of that, is genocide that our government is paying 70 to 80% of and supports through and through. And I guess, people screaming, "Why isn't China, why isn't Russia doing something?" is a bit rich, considering it's their government that's doing the genocide. It's just, I don't know, it's just wild. Let me ask you this. Why is there a Chinese warship in the Red Sea? I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just curious as to why.
From the surface, I would say at the very least what it's doing is it's observing and it's collecting data, signals intelligence, electronic intelligence. And it's watching what the US is doing to undermine or attack Ansar Allah, and also probably what Israel is doing against Iran. So it's collecting data. Now, what is it doing with its data collection? I don't have good information on that, but we know at the very least that thing is set up with multiple radar domes. It's collecting a lot of electronic intelligence.
Do we know the connection between Ansar Allah and China currently? Or that's just not known, it's just inferred?
I think it's inferred. I mean, I think traditionally, as I said, during the era of Mao, China was really about supporting third world liberation movements. Like North Korea, go all over Africa, you'll see North Korean, monuments. That's this great connection between the socialist bloc and the rising, third world liberation movements. So we don't know a lot, and I apologize once again. I'm not an insider to
You
these.
are fine. I am just fascinated by this. Look, the reason I'm fascinated by this is because under normal circumstances, yes, I am inferring a lot, but I'm inferring that the worship is not there for no reason, that the information that it's collecting is not there for no reason, and that it's not, let's say, a separate thing that Ansarullah has gotten deadly accurate, and that just so happened to be a Chinese warship there collecting all sorts of data and intelligence of things in the region. I applaud this, by the way. This is it, because from my point of view, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is China's way of getting involved without getting involved. They're like, okay, we are not going to attack anybody because if we get involved, it's too much of a big move, meaning we can't inject ourselves into the situation in a way that's going to provoke a larger war. Fair enough. Hey guys, you need information. I applaud China for this, so I'm not saying this is a negative. Do you disagree with that, or I just want to?
Do I disagree with
What I'm saying here? That ultimately the warship is there for reasons, and the reasons that the warship is there is we don't like what is occurring in Israel. We can't get involved directly, but we can give information because information can just flow freely to whoever. Nobody can put our fingerprints on it, but information can flow freely. And if Ansarullah just so happens to get their hands on the information, then God bless them for doing so. We're okay with it.
Yeah,
That's what I'm taking from this. That's why I'm fascinated by the story.
yeah. I think probably some version of that is happening. Once again, we have to understand, battle as being something much, much more complex than kinetic engagement, right?
Agreed.
There's logistics, there's information, there's tactical data. There are all kinds of things that are happening underneath the surface, and it's a little bit like, the U.S. is spoiling for a war with China. It has calendar dates to trigger a war with China. It's looking for something that is continually. They're looking for a casus belli. They're looking for a reason to start a war, and they're constantly provoking. They've set the theater, and now they're in the provocation stage, and they're waging constant information warfare. The way that I see China doing with these types of things, where they have warships and data collection platforms placed prominently, it's a little bit like, when you think a fight is starting, you just put your hands up and you let them know that you're here and that you are not fighting, you are present. And sometimes, I don't know if you've seen this, these are people who know what they're doing. They'll put their hand very gently on your shoulder or on your sternum, and they're not pushing and they're not hitting, but they're listening, right?
Yeah.
They're listening to any movement that you're about to do. And it sends a message. I'm here and I'm listening to you. And I'm very, very present. I think that's the message that's being sent out.
Pursuant to that. The reason why I'm going down this line is because from my point of view, China has been more vocal recently about their interests, whether that's with Russia telling the EU, we're not going to let Russia fall. And I'm paraphrasing, because obviously we'll be next. And all of this nonsense about, hey, you should help us against the Russians. It's like, why would we do that? Why would we hurt our own interests? And in Iran, where it seems that China has sold Iran the surface-to-air missiles. Now, these, if I'm not mistaken, were the same ones that Pakistan used to great effect against the Indian Air Force. So you can imagine that these are in high demand, considering they've been battle tested and proven in combat, in modern combat, no less. And so Iran, thankfully, is not relying entirely purely on their own technology and manufacturing. They're actually getting support from China in this. And that support is not just for the missiles, it's an entire array that goes along with those missiles. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. Give me your take on that too, because from my point of view, this is a fusion between China and Iran, where China is recognizing that Iran is one of our key interests, and we need to ensure that Iran survives and is intact.
So a couple of things there. First, China and Iran have had good relations going back millennia. As I said, the Sasanian Empire and the Tang Dynasty in the 600s, had powerful relations. When the Sasanian Empire fell, the royalty fled to China, and then they became high officials in the Chinese court. So this is a relationship, two big empires very close to each other that have never gone to war, but have always supported each other. This goes back, at least 2 millennia. So those relations are strong and enduring. Now, there's a lot of language around, really at this point, it's still speculation, Jamal, but there's speculation that Iran is seeking to acquire J-10s. And as it acquires J-10s, it's probably likely to also acquire PL-15s, which are the air-to-air missiles that were used so effectively by the Pakistani Air Force against the Indian Air Force. Once again, to go over the facts, the Pakistani using J-10s were able to shoot down at least 3 Indian Rafales. And this was possibly one of the largest dogfights or aerial engagements since World War II, 140 jets in the air. And it was also the longest recorded air-to-air kill. It was beyond visual distance, but apparently the Pakistani J-10s fired and knocked down at least 3-4 Indian jets. At least this is what the Indians are acknowledging. And the Pakistanis have said, we could have done much worse. We were just kind of, sending a message, but we could have knocked, much more of them down. And so everybody's chasing. But this sends a very, very powerful message. First, that Pakistan is no walkover, but that Chinese technology is very, very formidable. Before, people said, it's all Chinese junk. They don't know how to do anything. It's all American knockoffs, and it won't do anything. Now they've seen that it really can be effective. It's being battle tested. It's being shown in an actual battle situation to be more superior than the best Western technology. So that's a real wake up. So is Iran acquiring this? It's very possible. We don't have official confirmation yet, but we'll see if it happens. Once it does happen, what it does signal is that China and Iran will be strongly integrated from a military standpoint, because when you get those kinds of weapons, you're not simply buying an individual weapons platform, you're importing an entire defense ecosystem, including, the software, the tactical data networks, the sensors, the, targeting systems, decision systems, etc. It's incredibly complex, incredibly expensive, and it will take a long time to implement. But once it does that, it creates a very strong and often binding relationship between the two countries. So it's sometimes often a precursor to a military alliance, but we are not there yet. Regarding the Chinese, regarding this claim that China has said we won't let Russia fall, this was Wang Yi, and Wang Yi would never use those words. And so this was reported by the South China Morning Post, which you have to be very, very careful about. The South China Morning Post was the house organ of the British colonial administration in Hong Kong.
Interesting.
Yes, they had access to all the ministerial meetings. They literally had a journalist there in the ministerial meetings of the British colonial government, and then they would take down and repeat what the British colonial administration wanted, the propaganda that they wanted put out by the colonial government. And so it has this long, infamous history of disinformation, misinformation. So read what you hear in the South China Morning Post with extreme caution. It has been known for telling incredible whoppers. For example, this is they put out an article which is really a $30 trillion libel suit. They were the newspaper which claimed, without any backing, without any proof, that COVID had started in China 2 months before it was discovered. And I contacted the editorial department and I said, "Do you have any follow up on this? Do you have any proof? Who is your anonymous source?" And they just like clammed up completely, not a single word. But every single lawsuit against China has pointed to that single article. So it's really a $30 trillion libel suit waiting to happen that South China Morning Post is responsible. So they are not a responsible actor. They will throw in some good local flavor articles, and there are some good journalists and some good editorial writers, but they will also mix the fecal matter into the hamburger just to make sure that this is just adhere to tradition. So this is what they're doing. So what China probably said is that if Russia falls, China will be next. That's probably what Wang Yi said, and that is a reasonable assumption to make. And certainly this is what he would have messaged to Kaja Kallas, and then her aides decided that they wanted to spin it into this thing that essentially they're setting up a framing that China doesn't want Russia to fall. Implication being that China is supporting Russia in its fight. China is a party to the war. And then you have the follow-up on this. This is Mark Rutte. He's the chief of NATO. And he said, I think it was 1 or 2 days ago, he said that China is preparing for World War III. It's setting us up for World War III because, when China, and pure speculation, pure supposition, when China attacks Taiwan, Xi Jinping is going to call Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, and he's going to say, create a distraction over there while we take Taiwan, and therefore Russia will attack NATO. This is what he said. I mean, Medvedev said that Rutte had eaten too many magic mushrooms.
Yeah.
And that to get some details.
Yes. He said, Medvedev is my favorite Russian at this point. Like the stuff that he says, I think he's the honest voice of what's coming out of Russia, even though Putin is like the velvet glove. Yes, I remember Rutte saying that. I got to be honest with you, I don't really pay much attention to European leaders. There's a British saying, words without swords. Effectively, dude, you have no power. You're vassals. You can say whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. Kallas is beautifully incompetent. She's a very attractive woman, dumb as a box of rocks. And the things that she said.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
She says insane things all the time. There's a steady stream of bullshit that comes out of her that is impressive. It's almost like a X-Man power, like a mutant power for her to just say incompetent things. She is from Estonia, who maybe have 30 people in the military. And yet she says some of the most provocative things you would hear out of any woman or any person anywhere. She is a marvel. And I don't mean in a good way. So I fair enough. I do get your point.
Jamal, it's the grizzly bear fallacy all over again. And, I said 6% of sentient adults in the US believe that they can fight, not just a bear, but a grizzly bear, which can weigh up to 1,500 pounds, that they can fight it with their bare hands and defeat it, right? And, this question was asked not simply to men. It's not just crazy men. Women also believe this. She's one of these women that believes that they can fight a grizzly bear
I
with.
think Garland used to call them Nazi princesses. It's like all these lunatics. Annalena Baerbock, another one, very attractive. I don't know what it is. In fact, Kalis looks very closely to my ex, which is always weird when I see her because she says such crazy things, and I think to myself, "Oh my God, how are you this insane?" KJ, thank you for this. This is a fantastic breakdown. I am illuminated by your explanation of this. And I'm encouraged by it, believe it or not. Like, I like the fact of China getting more involved. I like the fact that they are aware of their interests. And it seems that they're getting more involved in their interests. One last point, though. And I hate to use this article since you just kind of put a knife in this publication. But South China Morning Post is saying that China is denying giving air defense systems to Iran. Now, I don't know what's true in this. And this could be something that is being buried. Maybe they haven't agreed upon it yet. As you pointed out, this hasn't necessarily been clarified and agreed as a ironclad thing. It's just something that is being reported. Apparently, the source of it was a rumor or something that came out of an Arab network. Who knows?
There's a lot of speculation going on, Jamal.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of good information, a lot of speculation. I think some of it is, it's what people would like to see. So they're projecting what they want. I think some of it may be legitimate analysis. I mean, certainly it looks like Iran does need air defense systems. It needs to revamp its entire air defense system because they were knocked out last year. Israel did this very, very deliberately in order to set up, the attack on Iran. Now, the other thing to remember is that Israel got its rear end whipped. Okay,
Yes, they did.
they thought they could get away with a sucker punch, and they threw the sucker punch, and it landed a glancing blow, and the other person then took them to the ground and administered the hiding of their life. The other thing to remember is that the United States and the UK and all the king's horses and all the king's men brought all the air defense systems that they could bring to bear to quote unquote protect Israel against the retaliation, the wrath of Iran, infuriated Iran, to protect Iran. So, you had SM-3, SM-6, THAAD, plus, Arrow 2, Arrow 3, plus David's
Dome.
plus Iron Dome, system, right? Everything. They brought Patriot batteries out of Japan and Korea to send them to the Middle East to protect against this Iranian volley. And if you listen to the DoD, they said this was the most intense engagement of our Patriot systems, bar none, in history. And the result of that? They failed. Israel was pummeled. And so much so that they've put a blackout on the news. We don't know what the battle damage is, but we know that it's severe. Otherwise, we would be, if it were token, we would see breast beating and talking about how vicious they are. But because it was so devastating, they've put a complete blackout on it. So we don't know it. All we know is that in Iran, people, when the ceasefire happened, people were celebrating in the streets. You did not see any celebration in, Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, right? Okay. You know that there was very serious damage. But this also sends the message to the United States that your best defense systems, your THAAD, your Patriot, deployed in the most intensive way possible since the creation of these systems, are essentially sieves, that they don't work. And
by the way, Ukraine also.
Yes.
In Ukraine also.
Yes. I mean, look at THAAD. It's $1 billion system. Each one of those interceptors is what, $13 million, and you have six, let's, yeah, 6 times 8. I mean, it's a huge system. It's incredibly expensive. There are only 8 of them in the world, and they moved them to the Middle East to protect Israel, and they did not work. And so here's where we see that the defense scam, where for years they were riding the gravy train, putting out these overpriced defense systems. They're like the equivalent of women's purses. These like $10,000, $30,000 purses, right? They're essentially they're just bags holding stuff, right? But they were selling these to the government and making extraordinary claims. They will intercept a thunderbolt from Thor. They will we will catch the bullet between our teeth, and everybody is perfectly safe. And of course, they didn't work, and so that creates a fundamental change in the strategic calculus. And that, along with Chinese surveillance and electronic intelligence collection in the Middle East, plus other logistical developments, plus other trade and economic developments that happen in the global South, signal that there is some deep and profound changes happening. The only question is, will the U.S. and Kaja Kallas, will they still adhere to the grizzly bear fallacy? Are they still on this suicidal mission to assert global hegemony? That
Yes.
remains seen.
The answer is yes. Yes. The answer is yes, KJ. Unfortunately, the answer is yes. And Netanyahu is in the U.S. trying to fight a grizzly bear as we speak. So
And nominating Donald Trump for the Nobel Prize.
I nearly spit on my screen. When I saw that. It's just, there's a level of illusion to this. I'm not going to keep you, but there's a level of illusion to this that is breathtaking. The idea that a man who's a war criminal, literal, who's committing a genocide, literal, is nominating the person who's helping him commit that genocide for a peace prize, again, literally paying for 70, 80% of everything taking place, is breathtaking. The idea that he is begging Trump to go back into a war because in their mind, they won the war. Again, breathtaking. Israel got stomped in that. Yes, they were able to murder a lot of people, but if you look at Tel Aviv, if you look at Jerusalem, if you look at Haifa, if you look at the military sites that they are effectively hiding from the world, they got crushed in a way that was so significant that Trump had to throw his body into the fight in order to stop the fight because his client, his proxy, was getting crushed and they were about to run out of money and go belly up because they could not stop the missiles that Iran was effectively firing at Israel. But in their minds, this illusion of, oh, we won, I'm doing great, I'm doing Donald Trump, I should get the peace prize. And one last point, the weapons that you pointed out. I've always asked this question in the United States. How do we know that there's a return on investment for the money that we put into our military? We're a capitalist country. Obviously, if you're spending $1 trillion, that's going to be a heavily leaky bucket. They're not going to be able to ensure that all the systems work in the way that they claim they are. You are taking it on faith. And now that those systems are being challenged in Ukraine, or for that matter, in Israel, we are finding them lacking. KJ, man, you are fantastic. When is the next show that you're doing coming out, by the way?
It just came out yesterday. It's with Carlos Martinez on the China Report, and he is a fantastic commentator. I invite people to go to the Breakthrough News Network, look up the China Report, and you'll see my dialogue with Carlos. And he talks about what it means to have China on the global stage, how that affects the global South, and the ways that in which it gives hope to the rest of the world. We live in a system which is failing. It's literally the Western capitalist system is failing. It's always been failing. And you say that that they live in an illusion. Well, it has always been an illusion. It's always been an illusion, and it has always been genocidal. The empire has always been genocidal. It's gone from one genocide to the other. It's just that this is the first one, which is being live streamed, and so now people are, waking up, from that indoctrination. But I think the thing to remember is that when you talk about return on investment, which is a very, very business capitalist term, is of course the return on investment is for the the investor class, for the ruling imperial elite. They make out like bandits every time there's a war. War is good business. Invest your son, invest your children, right? Blood makes the grass grow. This is their mindset. Peter Thiel, he thinks that, and all these other people, they think that they need to control AI so that they can have these AI weapons and AI surveillance that will essentially dominate and control everybody. But most certainly, they will be used in war against China. The thing is, the problem in the West is that everything has been financialized. When I say everything has been financialized, it's that they don't build anything useful anymore. They've actually lost the competencies to do that. They've de-skilled themselves. And when I say build, it's not simply build things industrially. It's that, like, what is the level of coding that's being done? What's the level of, program, that's being done? To a certain extent, it's all a scam. This is why a small group of, I think, largely women in China, from a tiny startup, were able to create a better AI, DeepSeek, than OpenAI. Why? Because OpenAI was simply just throwing money and compute at it. Just if you just make the compute large enough and have enough, trillion parameters, we will get general artificial intelligence. And this small group of Chinese AI researchers, led by a young woman, they said, no, there's a better way to do this. And you look at the kind of mathematical elegance in the way that they, optimize the algorithms. You can see that there's some real thinking and there's some real engineering going on, and there's some real good math problem solving going on. Whereas in the West, it's just throw money at it. So to a certain extent, it is all fraudulent. I mean, Peter Thiel knows this when he talks. He's an investor, and he, from time to time, hints that he's investing in these things, but he knows that they won't work. They're all fraudulent. They're all scams. And this is what you get when you have a financialized monopoly capitalist system, is that nobody builds things, nobody can build things, they've de-skilled everything. They just want to create legal and financial traps that exert and claim money from other people. So hence the Pentagon has never passed an audit in its life, right? Never. Trillions of dollars, and they cannot audit the thing. Why? Because it's a big black hole of corruption. If you work outside of the Pentagon, you have to do what's called, you have to do a very, very intensive audit. And anything over, I think, $600,000, you have to have this single audit and show that all your controls are in place, and that every single penny is accounted for. Every last, drop of every cube of sugar is accounted for. And on the other hand, the Pentagon has vast trillions of dollars. It's just a big black hole. They can't account for anything. They don't know where it's gone, and it's just essentially unauditable. They put yellow tape around the thing and say, just don't go here. We don't know what's going on. But this is the system. So this is the system that is both accelerating to war at the same time that we know that it is, filled. It's filled with, inequity and corruption and inefficiencies, etc. So, what a scary, scary situation. What are they really counting on? They're counting on the use of nukes. That is their little ace in the in the pocket. That's the thing which is so dangerous. This is why we have to speak up and see if we can prevent this escalation to war. Eli Ratner, just a few months ago in Foreign Affairs, he said that we need to build an Asian NATO. This is Eli Ratner, Captain Ahab. He was the minder to the Secretary of Defense, making sure that he stayed focused on China, because Lloyd Austin, was really brought in as a kind of a figurehead. It was really Eli Ratner behind the scenes. So this escalation to war is very, very real, at the same time that they know that they are corrupt and crumbling. They know this as well as anybody, because they have their fingers in every little pie. And so then what are they relying on? They're relying on proxies. They want to strong arm proxies into waging the war for them. That is to say, Ukraine, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, etc. Anybody they can twist their arm into, as well as Australia. They want to turn the entire Pacific into a war zone. It's already being staged war. They've been doing this since 2009, 10, 11. I've watched the buildup of bases and the implementation of incredibly dangerous weapon system. They've just sent HIMARS to Taiwan. Okay, those HIMARS on Taiwan will be able to attack 20 Chinese cities on the coast along the coast near Taiwan. So incredible escalation, incredible outsourcing, and the building up of proxies for war, and of course the constant insanity, this grizzly bear fallacy, which is backed up. Tiny bit of truth is the idea that they're going to use tactical nukes and possibly strategic nukes as well. So
you realize a U.S. point of view would have been to attack those places before they ever got the weapons.
Yes. Yeah.
I know China thinks differently, but
this is what happens, Jamal. This is what happens. And, to a certain extent, the U.S. wanted to destroy China in, 1940, 1953, 1958, 1961, 1962. It was going to nuke China along with the Soviet Union, just for the hell of it. Just because if they got into a war with the Soviet Union, you would get a 2-for-1, right? They would nuke China as well. So these plans have been continuous and constant, and they've always been, ready to take off the shelf and implement. And so we're in this situation as the empire unwinds and the twilight sets. They become more and more desperate. And you have your yapping poodles like Callas and Rutte and everybody else. They are barking and creating the cacophony. And in the meantime, the provocations are happening. China is trying to avoid getting pulled into the provocations, and the escalation to war is very, very real and concrete.
On the positive side, this is prehistory. And if we can make it out of this, all of those racist, imperialist attitudes will be demolished when the empire collapses. We just need to make sure that we don't take the world with it when it does. KJ, thank you for this, man. Really, honestly, you are awesome. KJ No, he's a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region, contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator. It was once censored by Amazon, which still blows my mind. It is now available at iacenter.org. You can also find KJ on the Breakthrough News Network under the China Report. Thank you for this, man. You have a fantastic day, KJ.
Thank
Be safe.
you.
Alrighty. Definitely check KJ out, Breakthrough News Network, China Report. It just came out yesterday. Definitely check out his work. This is just a taste of how good KJ is. I am always deeply appreciative that he joins me. I really am.